Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John, here to tell you what it is in Samson, Shimshon, Part 2. Okay, we left Part 1. What had happened? Well, Manoah and his wife were promised a baby, and the baby came at the end of chapter 13. Let's review that one. Verse 24, it says, the woman gave birth to a boy and named him Shimshon, Samson. And he grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him while he was in Mahanadan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Remember, we said she named him Shimshon. And in Hebrew, Shimshon is Shin, Mem, Shin, Vav, Nun. Those first three letters, Shin, Mem, Shin, spell sun, Shemesh. So Samson's name means sunshine. Okay, we're moving to Judges chapter 14, verse 1 and 2. It says, then Shimshon went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. So he came back and told his father and mother, I saw a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. Where have we seen Timnah before? Anyone remember? We saw this back in the Judah-Tamar story. Remember, Judah went down to Timnah and found a prostitute. It was his daughter-in-law, Tamar, and she was dressed as a prostitute, but that happened in Timnah. Okay? So Timnah in the Bible is, Samson's going to finding a woman he shouldn't be with. Judah went down to Timnah. It's kind of the Vegas of its time. Okay? And I'm sure Manoah and his wife were really puzzled what was happening with their son seeking a woman amongst these uncircumcised Philistines, right? They knew that their son was in covenant with the Lord, the Nazirite vow. Why is he doing this? So, verse 3, it says, then his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all your people that you go and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Shimshon said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. You know, this kind of lets you know the whole the sign of the times. Well, what was it like in Israel at this time? Judges 17:6 says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Right? That's pretty much the theme here. He wants the woman, he gets her, or he sends for her. Proverbs 12:15 says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. Okay? What else? By the way, this Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she looks good to me. You know, that's Samson. That's the first thing we hear Samson say in this story. That's it. Just park that in the back of your head, okay? Those are his first words. Verse 4, however, his father and mother did not know it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now at that time, Philistines were ruling over Israel. Okay, so God has this bigger plan that's happening, and he's allowing this to happen, that Samson's going after this woman that he's not supposed to go after. Okay, verse 4. However, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an occasion to go after against the Philistines. Now at the time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. Then Shimshon went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and came as far as the vineyards of Timnah. And behold, a young lion came roaring toward him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, so he tore him as one tears a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. But he did not tell his father and mother what he had done. All right, man, there's a lot packed in there. Okay, it says, a young lion came roaring toward him. You know, the lion, we see this in the I think it's 1 Peter or 2 Peter, one of the Peters. It talks about that the devil goes around like a roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. Okay, so this picture of a lion is a picture of temptation or Satan. And notice also, Samson is by himself at this point. He went down with his mother and father, but they are not with him as this lion attacks. Okay? So when this temptation, when Satan sends a temptation, he's usually sending it when you're alone and you have no one to help defend you or that you can call upon for support. Okay? And it said it was a young lion. When it says young lion, it's not a cub, it's not a baby, but it's also not some old decrepit lion. When it's saying a young lion, it's referring to a lion in its full strength. Okay? And Samson, what does he have? Does he have any weapons with him? He got nothing. He has his bare hands. The only thing that Samson has in this fight is the Spirit of the Lord, which came upon him mightily. And notice, Samson doesn't even call out for the Spirit of the Lord to come upon him. It just comes, right? This is how we should be living, so that we are, it's like a motion detector. When you walk out on your patio, the motion detector senses you're there and bing, it just comes on. You don't call for the light, you don't flip the switch, it's just there. That's the kind of life we want to be living. That when we need the Spirit, boom, it's there. Okay? And that's what's happened here with Samson. Nice. What else? This Spirit also, this Spirit coming upon someone in the Old Testament is different from the Spirit coming upon someone in the New Testament. You know, once you put your faith in Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, once you can profess with your mouth that Jesus, Yeshua, is Yahweh, and that you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, once you are born again, once you are saved, once you accept Yeshua as your Mashiach, and you know who he is, the Spirit of God enters you and indwells you, and it is there for life. That is New Testament. In the Old Testament, you had the Spirit coming upon certain individuals, and it would come upon them to accomplish a certain task, whether or not they were spiritually in line with God or not. Samson, he's not necessarily in line with God here. He's running after a Philistine woman, right? Yet, the Spirit comes upon him, he does the mighty thing that he has to do, in this case, killing a lion, and then the Spirit presumably departs from that person. So there's a difference between Old Testament and New Testament Spirit coming upon you. Once it comes upon you in the New Testament, because you've accepted Yeshua as your Savior, it's there. Got it? Okay, Judges 14, verse 7. So he went down and talked to the woman, and she looked good to Shimshon. When he returned later to take her, he turned aside to look at the carcass of the lion, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the body of the lion. So he scraped the honey into his hand, and went on eating as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they ate. But he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey out of the body of the lion. Okay, so Judges 14, verse 6. We already read this one. And verse 9, he scraped the honey into his hands and went on, and he gave it to his mother and father. Notice, first he had to fight, right? And then he got the delight, the honey. He had to fight the lion, and then he got the delight from the lion, right? So I guess it's no sweat, no sweet, right? No conflict, no conquest. No cross, no crown. There's kind of a parallel between those. Judges 14, verse 10. Then his father went down to the woman, and Shimshon made a feast there, for the young men customarily did this. When they saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. This word for feast, by the way, is a mishta. I may be pronouncing it wrong. Mishta. This is not the feast of Moed. Remember the Moedim? There are 7 of them: Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, Shavuot, Pentecost, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. Those are the Moedim, and we oftentimes refer to those as the feasts. This is not the kind of feast that we're talking about here. Okay, Samson, he's making a feast, a party, a buffet, a celebration. This is his wedding to this woman down here, okay? And I can imagine if he's bringing 30 of his companions with him, or they bring 30 companions, I'm betting the wine is flowing. It doesn't say that, but there's a good chance that there's drink at this feast. So we don't know, again, we don't know that Samson's partaking in the grapes, but we know that Samson touched the corpse, and there's probably a good chance that he had the grapes too. And that's going to come up a little bit later on, where he does, again, associate his being with grapes. Okay, verse 12. Then Samson said to them, his 30 companions, "Let me now propound a riddle to you. If you will indeed tell it to me within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothing." Okay? And here again, this is the people at the feast. Verse 13. "But if you are unable to tell me, then you shall give me 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Propound your riddle, that we may hear it." So he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." But they could not tell the riddle in 3 days. I like in the English that it's a nice little poem rhyme here, right? Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. In the Hebrew it doesn't rhyme. It's out of the eater came food, and out of the strong came sweetness. It's ma'akal and mathok. 2 words that don't rhyme, but it's nice. The actual ma'akal means food, and what is food? Food is something to eat. So it does translate nice into a rhyme, but the Hebrew words don't rhyme. Verse 15. "Then it came about on the 4th day that they said to Shimshon's wife, 'Entice your husband, so that he will tell us the riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us to impoverish us? Is this not so?' Samson's wife wept before him and said, 'You only hate me, and you do not love me. You have propounded a riddle to the sons of my people, and have not told it to me.' And he said to her, 'Behold, I have not told it to my father and mother. Should I tell you?' However, she wept before him for 7 days, while their feast lasted. And on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him so hard. Then she told the riddle to the sons of her people. So the men of the city came and said to him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, 'What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion?' And he said to them, 'If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle.'" Well, there's a lot packed into all that. First of all, notice they tell the wife, "Go find out the answer to this riddle, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire." Wow, that's a pretty bold threat. They're gonna burn her and her father's house. And so she gets the answer and gives it to her people, and they answer Samson. And then he says, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." I'm not sure heifer is a term of endearment. Maybe it was back then. I'm not sure it is anymore. And even more important, notice what Samson said there. If you had not, he's putting the blame on them. if you had not plowed with my heifer. You know what Samson should have said? Samson should have said, if I had not plowed with your heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Samson's the one who's plowing with their heifer. He's the one, he shouldn't be with this Philistine woman. But he is. But again, he's putting the blame on them when the blame really should be on him, because he shouldn't be with these women, right? You see that back in the Garden of Eden, when God said to Adam, did you eat from this tree? And what did Adam say? Well, you know, the woman that you gave me, she's the one who gave to me and ate. You immediately blame somebody else. And then he turns to Eve and says, did you eat from this tree? Well, the serpent, she's blaming the serpent. We always blame the other. You understand? That's what Samson's doing here. Verse 19, then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them, and took their spoil, and gave the changes of clothes to those who told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his friend. So Samson returns to his mother and father's house, and so the Philistines, or the woman, the wife, and her father, they're assuming, okay, well, Samson's done with her, and so she, the wife, is given to a companion who had been Samson's friend. Got it? Okay, so you can see how when Samson returns to his house, that the Philistines are assuming he's rejected his wife, right? So it's understandable that they would have given her to somebody else. Verse 1 of chapter 15. But after a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, Shimshon visited his wife with a young goat and said, I will go into my wife in her room. But her father did not let him enter. Her father said, I really thought that you hated her intensely, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please let her be yours instead. Samson then said to them, this time I shall be blameless in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm. Verse 4, Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took torches, and turned the foxes tail to tail, and put one torch in the middle between two tails. You know what? You know how long it would take me, John, to catch one fox? And it just says, as a matter of factly, Samson went and caught 300 foxes. I don't know. Okay, verse 5. When he had set fire to the torches, he released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, thus burning up both the shocks and the standing grain, along with the vineyards and groves. Then the Philistines said, who did this? And they said, Shimshon, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he took his wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. Isn't that interesting? They threatened, if you don't find out the riddle, we're going to burn you and your father's house. So she's worried and afraid that she's going to get burned, and so she betrays her husband. This is something you should not do, even under threat of burning, but she has a fear that she's going to be burned. So she does the wrong thing and betrays her husband. And what's the end result? She ends up being burned. The very thing that she feared and by sin tried to avoid, that came upon her. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Verse 7. Samson said to them, since you act like this, I will surely take revenge on you, but after that I will quit. He struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter, and he went down and lived in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Then the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and spread out in Lehi. Okay, so what's happened? Samson went down, did the great slaughter after they burned his wife and her father. Then Samson goes down to this place in Lehi. What is Lehi? Well, it's interesting. Lehi is the Hebrew word for jawbone, which is about to play a part in the story. How clever. We read this, I think in the English Bible it says Lehi or Lehi or something. But in the Hebrew, it's Lehi, jawbone. The men of Judah said, now remember, the men of Judah, these are Jews, right? He's gone down and he's living in the rock of Etam in Lehi, and his own people are there. Samson is there with his own. The men of Judah said, "Why have you come up against us?" And they said, "We have come up to bind Samson in order to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us?" And he said to them, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." So the Philistines, they want Samson, and they're coming after him, and they get the Jews, because the Jews are now scared. You've really ticked off the Philistines, and we're all going to have to pay for this. And so they say to Samson, "We have come to bind you so that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines." And Samson said to them, "Swear to me that you will not kill me." So they said to him, "No, but we will bind you fast and give you into their hands. Yet surely we will not kill you." Then they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. Okay, so 3,000 of the Israelites come against him. Samson's not worried about 3,000 Israelites, right? He can defend himself. He's got the strength. He's got the power. Okay? Instead, he let himself be bound so that he could be delivered into the hands of the enemies. Wow, that sounds familiar. Samson, in this case, is a type of Messiah, of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ. Because the Israelites came to Samson and said, "Listen, we want to bind you and give you over to them." And Samson, he didn't kill a single one of anybody in this, of the Israel, right? Jesus, Yeshua, he is betrayed by his people, the Jews. And he's delivered by them into the hands of the Romans. You see the picture? And Yeshua, Jesus, he could have saved himself at any time by his great strength, but he did not. And same with Samson. Samson could have freed himself and by his great strength, but he did not. He allowed himself to be bound and given into the hands of his enemies, the Romans, so that his own people might go free. Samson did the same thing. So there is a little parallel here between Samson and Jesus, okay? You're going to see other parallels between Samson in the future. I'm not going to give it away yet. Probably in part 3. There's going to be a part 3. Okay, verse 14. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted as they met him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, so that the ropes that were on his arms were as flax that is burned with fire, and his bonds dropped from his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, so he reached out and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. Then Samson said, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the lehi of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men." When he had finished speaking, he threw the jawbone from his hand, and he named the place Ramath Lehi. Verse 18. Then he, Samson, became very thirsty, and he called out to the Lord and said, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now Shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Samson, Samson, Samson! You hear the prayer? He starts out, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant. It appears to be praising God for this victory. And then he gets, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? What kind of a prayer is this? You understand? Hey God, I'm so glad I could serve you and do these wonderful things. And now what? You're going to let me die of thirst? There's just I don't even know what the emotion is he's putting there, but it's not nice. All right. Verse 19. But God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, so that water came out of it. When he drank, his strength returned and he revived. Therefore he named it En Hachoreh, which is in Lehi to this day. So he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. I want to just give you this little bit, not because it does add to the story, but also just for the Hebrewness of it, okay? For some of you, you're learning your Hebrew letters and we're learning Hebrew words. This is kind of cool how he puts this in here. Therefore, he called its name Ein HaKoreh. HaKorah, okay? There I have, the part that's it's enlarged, I have it in the Hebrew. Kara, you see, kara is the first word. It's a kuf, resh, aleph. Kara, it means to call. Kara. So he called its name En HaKorah. The last word there, it's hey, it starts hey, kuf, vav, resh, aleph. The hey in front of that last word is the, okay? And then you see kara again. So you have, he called, calling is twice in here. He called the name of the place, Ein HaKorah. Kara shows up again. Once, twice. Okay? Kara, where have we seen that? We've seen it back in Genesis 1:5. And God called the light day. There's Kara. And the darkness he called Lila. Vayikara. And he called Vayikara. You see Kara in there. Okay? And he called the darkness, he called night. There's Kara again. The book of Leviticus is not known as Leviticus in Hebrew. It's referred to as Vayikara. Va is and. The Yud is short for Yahweh, that's God, and God Kara, and he called. Okay? That's the word for Leviticus, Vayikara. Very, very nice. Okay? And the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. That's how Leviticus begins. Kara, you see it. By the way, in the original Hebrew, in the Torah, in the first verse of Leviticus, there it is, and the Lord called to Moses, that word Vayikara, the aleph is very small. We've talked about this, that some letters in the Torah are extra big, and some letters are extra small. There's some letters that are turned backwards. Some letters are split in half. Here's an example of a small aleph. Why? I don't know. Okay, and and the Lord called Yahweh, and the Lord called to Moses. Lord is Yud Hey Vav Hey, Yahweh, Yehovah, right? If you take Leviticus 1:1, every 7 letters spells the word Yahweh. I'm throwing that in for free, but there it is. He has his name hidden every 7 letters. The other thing here is the first letter, the first word of this. He called its name, we say En HaKorah, but the En is actually Ein. Ein HaKorah. And what is ayin? Ayin is a Hebrew letter, first of all. It looks like the Y, right? Ayin. And its picture is an eye. That's what ayin represents. Got it? That's its ancient Paleo-Hebrew. It makes sometimes the A sound, the O sound. It can make the E sound. Its gematria is 7. Look at its ancient picture. It is an eye. Okay? And if you ever wondered, why does the word I, as in I have 2 of them in my head, why does the word why I has a Y in it? Because it's from the Hebrew ayin. Right? Okay? So ayin means I, but in Hebrew, ayin also means spring. Maybe you've heard of, remember David when he was running and hiding from King Saul, he would run and hide in En Gedi, as we call it. En Gedi is really Ayin Gedi. Ayin Gedi. Ayin is the spring, and Gedi is, I think, is a young goat. It's the spring of the young goat. Got it? So Ayin has 2 meanings. It's I, and it's also spring. What are these 2 words that God would have the same word for 2 different things that are maybe at first glance unrelated? What does an eye and a spring have in common? Water comes out of both of them. Make sense? So that's why he's using ayin. It's the same, one word has 2 different meanings, but they are related in God's thinking. Water comes out of these, okay? And the word for fountain is ma'ayin. You see ayin, water comes out of it. All right? It's kind of clever how Hebrew works on a lot of these. Here's the word for the deep. You saw this back in Genesis 1:2. The Spirit of God hovered over the deep. This is the Tehom. Tehom is the deep. Tehom ends in a mem. What comes out of Tehom? Ma'im. Water. And from water ends in a mem. And what comes out of water? Fountains. Ma'ayin. And Ma'ayin ends in a noon. What comes out of fountains? Nachal. Rivers. If something comes from something else, the letter that it ends in, the thing that comes from it begins with that letter. That's kind of cool. We see that with, there's other examples, but we'll do it in another video. Okay. So, therefore, remember, God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, so the water came out. He drank. His strength was returned, and he revived. Therefore, he called its name Ain HaKorah, which is in Lehi to this day, the spring of the one calling. Okay. All right. This is going to end part 2. To God be the glory, to God be the honor, to God be the praise. Come back for part 3 because we're going to bring in Delilah. That's what you're all waiting for. Okay? All right. God bless. We'll see you soon. Wait! We have a bonus for part 2, and it's just a real quickie here for the letter Ayin. If you go back to Deuteronomy 6:4, you know the Shema Israel. This is, Jews recite this every morning and every night. Okay? Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. In this verse, we were just talking about the very small aleph in Vayikra, in Leviticus. In this verse, you have 2 enlarged letters. You have an ayin at the beginning in Shema, which is very large, and you have a dalet enlarged at the end in Echad. Ayin means eye, dalet means door. If you put the 2 together, ayin dalet is the word for witness. Okay? And dalet ayin is the Hebrew word da, which means to know. And you also have the word forever. That's, whenever you see Ayin Dalet, it's the Hebrew word for forever. So hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. By putting those two big letters in this verse, it's letting you know this is an eternal, forever statement. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. This also then points to the complex unity, right? The Lord our God, the Lord, he says it 3 times, is one. Very nice. And that is an eternal truth. And just for extra fun, if you throw in the gematria values of the Shema and put the value of each letter, the entire Shema adds up to 1118. And what is the Shema saying? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. If I had to boil it down to 2 words, it's the word one God. That's what it's saying. And that's what we Christians believe, that there is one God. Jews believe there's one God. Okay? The word for one is echad, which adds up to 13. The word God is Elohim, which adds up to 86. And if you multiply 13 times 86, you get 1118. The whole Shema, or the boiled down version, there it is. God bless. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back in part 3.